Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is January 26, 2015. We're going to talk about a number of different things tonight. I want to finish up the discussion that I began last week around the Charlie Hebdo massacre. I also would like to try to get into an issue with the BATFE around some changes to private gun manufacturing rules that will make it more difficult to manufacture guns privately. And I want to address the Chris Kyle situation. So I guess we'll get into that if we can as well. But for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, I am a regular writer for activistpost.com and theantimedia.org, as well as Natural Blaze. You can find my work at any of those websites. The radio show, Truth on the Tracks, can be heard here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on ucy.tv. And you can access the show's personal webpage, ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And on that page you'll find the articles, the recent articles that I've written that are linked up at the left-hand side of the page. You'll also find the archives of this show, and you'll find a chat room there as well if you want to take part in the discussion as the show is live. If you're interested in my work specifically, then I would refer you to brandonturbeville.com. That is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the interviews that I do, all of the archive versions of this show and all the other relevant information there. We've also got the books tab there available. You can click on the books tab and you can find the books that are available for purchase if you want to do that. We've also got an events tab that will be updated as well when there are speaking events. But tonight we're going to finish the discussion of the Charlie Hebdo false flag. Now, typical in terms of the mainstream media, and unfortunately the American populace, the issue surrounding Charlie Hebdo has largely disappeared. We last week when we were discussing this, that was I guess last Monday. This was when the issue was still in the national consciousness, and I'm talking about the American national consciousness. The French may be discussing it a little more than the Americans, but we won't split hairs about who's still talking about it. What we can say is that Americans probably have the shortest attention span of any population in the world now, rivaled only by the UK. And last week we discussed this. Again, most Americans have probably forgotten who Charlie Hebdo is by now. But the points, there were 15 points, and I've got an article up, 15 signs the Charlie Hebdo attack was a false flag. And there's 15 points here. We went through a number of them last week. I didn't get to all of them. We did the whole show about Charlie Hebdo, but I'm going to try to finish those up tonight just for the sake of having closure here. The first point was the suspects had traveled to Syria in order to fight against the secular government of Bashar al-Assad. We demonstrated how these individuals, at least one that we know of, but probably both, had traveled to Syria to fight with ISIS against Assad. And therefore, they were under the purview of United States intelligence, French intelligence, British intelligence, and essentially NATO intelligence. We got point number 2, which is that France itself is responsible for arming, training, and directing the very terrorist organizations fighting against the secular government of Bashar al-Assad. And we went through that as well, how France, not just NATO, but France specifically, has been a major player in the arming, the funding, the training, the aiding, the assistance of Al-Qaeda for years. Right? This goes back to Libya. We can go further back than that, but in recent history we can go back to the Libyan situation where they overthrew Gaddafi, and now into the situation where they're trying to overthrow Assad. Number 3. Both the suspects had been on the radar screen of French intelligence for a number of years. Their terrorist ties did not come as a surprise. We went through Sharif Kouachi, Saeed Kouachi, Ahmed Koulibaly. We went through all these guys, as well as Boumediene. We went through the connections to each other, the connections to other terrorist organizations, and the fact that this was indeed a terrorist cell that has, of course, connections to U.S., British, French intelligence, NATO intelligence, and we demonstrated that last week as well. Go back and listen to the show last week if you want to catch up on that, and also read the article, 15 Signs Charlie Hebdo Attack with False Flag. We've also got number 4, Kouachi's ties to Anwar al-Awlaki. This was the guy who had connections to a number of high-profile terrorist attacks. This is the Anwar al-Awlaki that Webster Tarpley started referring to as Anwar al-Awlaki, the CIA lackey, right? Because he was, in fact, Tarpley described him as a double agent that was used to give Al-Qaeda the Al-Qaeda seal of approval to dozens of terrorists. And these terrorists are 9/11 hijackers, right? Nawaf al-Hazmi, Khalid al-Midar, and Hani Hanjour. Also, he had connections to Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalab, the underwear bomber. He had connections to Nidal Malik Hassan of the Fort Hood shootings. All of these guys he had connections to. So it's also important to mention that in the months after 9/11, Awlaki had dinner at the Pentagon. And this was reported by CBS News, by Fox News, all of these organizations. Of course, number 5 was Kouachi lived with Abdul Muttalab, the underwear bomber in Yemen. And we went through that as well. Saeed Kouachi went to Yemen to study Arabic. We had, I guess we can jump back in here. It's there's an article, Paris attacker Saeed Kouachi, new convicted Nigerian airline bomber, and this came out of the Wall Street Journal, and it revealed the fact that Saeed Kouachi lived across the hall from Abdul Muttalab, the underwear bomber. And it was a 4-story dormitory of an Arabic language school in Sana'a in Yemen. It's the capital. It's the old city of Sana'a, where they went to the mosque. And both of these guys spent, Saeed spent 2 years in Yemen. And this is allegedly the base of Al-Qaeda's, one of the more dangerous groups, allegedly. But his brother Sharif also spent time in Yemen back in 2011, and we have the reports that Saeed, who was a French citizen, although he was of Algerian descent, he became a friend of Abdul Muttalab in Yemen before, of course, the underwear bombing. And we have a number of reports that this guy, Abdul Muttalab and Saeed, not only roomed across from one another, but they prayed together, and that they were pretty good friends. They were actually roommates. There other reporters have suggested that as well. Now, number 6, the Charlie Hebdo attackers were apparently part of an organized network. So we've got an article by Henry Samuel and Patrick Sauer for The Telegraph entitled Charlie Hebdo Attack, the Kouachi Brothers and the Network of French Islamists with Links to the Islamic State. And we went through a lot of that the last time in terms of Koulibaly, Saeed, Sharif, but we'll jump into this discussion here just to kind of tie these loose ends up before we move on. During the 2005 prison stay that Sharif Kouachi was convicted and was forced to serve, he met this Dajamel Begal, or Abu Hamza. This is a terrorist serving 10 years for a plot to blow up the U.S. Embassy back in 2001. Hamza had links to the Finsbury Mosque in London. That's a notorious intelligence operation that's being used to create, recruit, and maintain Islamic terrorism. And so Begal was serving a 10-year sentence for that back in Paris. We have reports stating that French intelligence agents photographed Sharif playing football with Begal in Marat in the Cantal region of central France when he was on house arrest back in 2010. They had 2 other Islamists that were present. That was Ahmed Ladouni and Farid Malouk. Right? They have you can read the reports of the article that I just mentioned. It's also linked in my own article. This is also, Sharif met this guy, Salim bin Ghalim. We talked a lot about this last week again, but he was one of the most wanted international terrorists at the time. Bin Ghalim met and befriended one of Sharif's friends, Buchnak, and the pair shared a cell in 2008 in Fresnay prison after his conviction for attempted murder. When he came out, it's funny, these guys get smaller sentences than you can get for marijuana here in the United States. When he got out, Bin Ghalim began working with other members of the Boutet Chaumont network, according to intelligence sources that were cited by Le Monde. He was a part of a group of Islamists that were attempting to break Smain Ait Ali Belkacem out of jail in 2002. Belkacem was a train bomber. He had done that in 1995 and injured 30 people in the process. Saeed, Sharif's brother, was never the focal point of a terrorist investigation or a terrorist attack until Charlie Hebdo, but his name cropped up on the sidelines of investigations in the terrorist attacks on a number of occasions. So we've also got another guy. Sharif is linked to Boubacar al-Hakim. That's also Abu Muqatel. This is Hakim was a French Islamist. He came from Tunisia, born in 1983, grew up in the 19th arrondissement. Remember the 19th district. It was he was thought to become a key figure in the Boutet Chaumont network, the jihadist network, when he met Kouachi. We have also got Hakim being implicated in recruitment and logistical organization of French jihadists so they could go fight in Iraq. And again, whenever you look at these recruiters, you have to look at, do these individuals have connections to intelligence operations? In most cases, either they do or their own handlers do. Now, Hakim, he traveled to Iraq in 2002. He came back about 4 times. And that's coming from Jean-Pierre Fallou. That's a expert at Sciences Po University in Paris. He said that he recruited militants to fight in Fallujah, and in 2008 they had Hakim and Sharif being arrested and convicted in Paris for the role in the network. Well, Sharif's charges were dropped, and I'm not really sure what happened to Hakim, although the report says he was sentenced to 7 years for running a way station in Damascus for young French Muslims who were going to fight U.S. forces in Iraq. So this is what Fallou has to say. He says, Hakim and no doubt Kouachi rejoined al-Qaeda's Iraqi networks after they were released from prison and accompanied them in their transformation into Daesh. The combat experience they acquired were useful in the cold-blooded assassinations they have carried out since. Okay. They were claiming that Hakim's arrest in 2008 broke up the Boutet Chaumont network. In 2013, though, he appeared in Tunisia. See, these guys, they get incredibly small prison sentences here. It's unbelievable. You can get more for possessing cocaine, and you do get more for possessing cocaine here in the United States. In 2013, Hakim appeared in Tunisia. He murdered 2 of the country's left-wing opposition politicians. It was Chokri Belaid and Mohamed Brahmi, February 6th and July 25th of 2013. He claimed responsibility for the murders in a video on behalf of ISIS. He filmed his video and released it. It was apparently taken in Islamic State territory somewhere in Iraq or Syria, saying, "We will return and kill several of you. You won't live in peace until Tunisia applies Islamic law." And Fallou says that the expert from the university says that Hakim represents the link between the Kouachi brothers and ISIL. He says it's impossible that an operation on the scale of the one that led to the massacre at Charlie Hebdo was not sponsored by Daesh. Well, I guess we could say not possible, but looking at the evidence, you're right. It had to be sponsored by Daesh. So I would ask Mr. Fallou and ask anyone else who's questioning this, if it has to be sponsored by Daesh, who's sponsoring Daesh? I can tell you. It's the United States. It's Britain. It's France. It's NATO. That's on record. Now, let's look at Amedi Coulibaly. This is the guy who was simultaneously holding up a kosher grocery store in Paris as well. Now, before he was killed, Ahmed Coulibaly apparently told a CNN affiliate reporter from BFM TV that he belonged to ISIS, and that he says that he was sponsored by ISIS. He was a part of ISIS. So he was 32, interesting age, I guess. He was actually a close associate of Sharif Kouachi. And that comes from a Western intelligence source that was reported by CNN. Right? Coulibaly and Sharif Kouachi were involved in that 2010 attempt to free Belkacem. Coulibaly was arrested in 2010. He had 240 rounds of ammunition for a Kalashnikov. He had a photo of himself with Dajamel Bigal, that was the terrorist recruiter who tried to bomb the U.S. Embassy in Paris. Coulibaly was indicted in 2010 with that prison break plot. Sharif was under investigation for the same plot. The evidence, they dropped the charges against him. And obviously Coulibaly was out, so apparently attacking a prison break only gets you 3 years in France, or 4 years in France. So this was called the Belkacem Project, by the way. That's what they're saying. Sharif and Coulibaly called this prison break plot. But Coulibaly shared residence with Boumediene. That was his common law wife, and we can look at her. When we look at Boumediene, she was suspected of having connections to the grocery store attack as well, but obviously not involved because she was not even in town for it. We've got reports by Design and Trend and a number of other mainstream media outlets. We have Reuters report saying that Turkey's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mevlut Cavusoglu, told the state-run Anadolu agency that Hayat Boumediene flew into Turkey from Madrid on January 2nd, stayed in a hotel in Istanbul. Cavusoglu says, quote, "There is footage of her at the airport. Later on, she stayed at a hotel with another person and crossed into Syria on January 8th. We can tell that based on telephone records." All right, so once the attack on the Charlie Hebdo magazines occurred, she apparently made her way into Syria through Turkey. And it's reported in the mainstream media, how confusing. She made it into Syria through Turkey without a struggle. Well, that's because she was funneled in. Turkey's been funneling in terrorists into Syria for years. So we've also got apparently footage showing her go through security at a Turkish airport on January 8th, which is the day after the attack on Charlie Hebdo. So it doesn't appear that she was anywhere near the attack, although she may have been involved in the logistics in some way prior to the attack. So all of this is going to say that we have a terrorist cell here, and when you look at the terrorist cells, you got to follow this up. And what you find when you follow it up are individuals who have connections to French intelligence through large mosques, through terrorist organizations, through Daesh, through ISIS. And when you look at that, you see the clear hand of the United States, France, and the UK. Now, point number 7. And we're gonna try to move along. Point number 7 is the third suspect. Now, initially there was a third suspect that was alleged to have been engaged in the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and this guy's name was Murad Hamid. Hamid was playing around on Facebook or social media, and suddenly he started seeing his name paraded around on social media as being the third suspect. So he reported himself to police. Now, he's been exonerated. He's okay. But the question is, was there a third shooter? And if not, why was a third individual considered as an accomplice to the massacre? I mean, there were a number of eyewitnesses reporting that there were indeed a third attacker who drove the getaway car. There were other, I think, reports that there were a third shooter. And the law enforcement agency saw it credible enough to say that there were 3 individuals and actually name one, Murad. So if they felt this confident that there was a third shooter, when we find out that Murad Hamid was not the third shooter, why wasn't there an investigation launched to find the third shooter? In other words, they're saying if it wasn't Murad, then it must not have happened at all. It must not have existed. All right, number 8, a second suspect. Now we've got the kosher grocery store holdup as well, and that's the question of the second suspect in the kosher grocery store, right? We have Hayat Boumediene. But Boumediene was in Turkey. She went to Syria. So where did the second suspect go? Was there a second suspect at the scene or nearby the scene? You know, is there still a second suspect, or did that accomplice just vanish into the memory hole that now that the main patsy has been eliminated? All right, number 9, we've got mysterious suicides. This is reminiscent of the Kennedy assassination, reminiscent of 9/11. We've got Police Commissioner Helrik Fredu, who had been investigating the attack on the Charlie Hebdo magazine. He is the lead investigator into this incident, and he kills himself in his office. We had the incident occurring in Limoges, the administrative capital of the Limousin region in west central France on, actually I don't have the date here, I regret that, but it's very strange, isn't it? They're claiming that he was depressed, that the investigation and the pressure of the investigation is what pushed him over the edge, but we've got no suicide note, and we're wondering, is this just another in the long line of mysterious suicides that take place around high-profile events when the individuals get too close to the information? Number 10, Koulibaly once met Sarkozy. Now, this is sort of tangential, and in one way you kind of don't want to mention it because of it being tangential, but it bears mentioning. We actually have a photograph of Koulibaly meeting former French President Nicolas Sarkozy. That was an article coming out of La Parisienne. Right, we've got Koulibaly meeting with Sarkozy. He says this took place in 2009 in the Élysée Palace. Sarkozy was meeting 9 young Frenchmen who just got jobs in a local factory. They were visiting the factory as a photo op. And they said they were all from Grigny, which was a tough Paris suburb that had riots about 10 years ago. This is what Koulibaly said about Sarkozy. He says, quote, "Sarkozy is not truly popular with the youth and the estates, but that is nothing personal. In fact, it is the case for most politicians. The encounter really impressed me. Whether I like him or not, he is the president, after all." So that's Koulibaly. It's a very strange statement coming from somebody who would then shortly after go on to a rampage in a kosher grocery store. Number 11, one of the attackers left his ID for the police to find. This is reminiscent of fire that can melt steel beams but not paper passports, right? This is reminiscent of the leaving Qurans every 5 feet before the 9/11 attacks. We've got Hamid Murad, when he turned himself in. All right, we know who he was. He was obviously identified. But we also have the claim that one of the killers and assassins left his ID papers in the getaway car. Now, it's not entirely unbelievable to believe that somebody in that state, that panicked state after committing a terrorist act and then trying to get away, would misplace and leave their ID if they brought it with them in the first place. And it's just so convenient, considering all these other connections and the prior history of false flag attacks, for us to really believe that this is what happened. So number 12, the terrorists have been liquidated. One of the hallmarks of a false flag operation involved the immediate liquidation of the patsies, or if not the immediate liquidation, the incapacitation of the patsies. Now this could take the form of killing them. It could take the form of drugging them. It could take the form of basically the destruction of their mental faculties. Now, if the patsies aren't alive to be interrogated, which is apparently something that the oligarchy would prefer, such as the Charlie Hebdo attackers, then dead men can tell no tales. If they've been rendered unable to speak, like Zarnev, or they've been so discredited, or they exhibit such major signs of mental instability at the time of the interrogation, I mean, Sirhan, you got James Holmes, then embarrassing or revealing information will either not be gained during the interrogation process or trial, or if it does seep out, then the suspect or the patsy has been so discredited as a mental patient that nothing he says is going to be taken seriously. Now, number 13, the publication that was attacked has served to promote the strategy of tension in the past. So let's talk about Charlie Hebdo for a minute. All right, so we've got CBS News writing that, well, we'll get to the CBS report in a minute, but we know that Hebdo was repeatedly threatened for caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad and sketches of other, well, mainly the Prophet Muhammad. They had a firebomb at the office in 2011 after the caricature of the Prophet. We have a year later they did that again, and that caused a bunch of protests from the Muslim world and all that kind of stuff. And then we have, right before the attacks, there was a foreshadowing of the attacks. It was a cartoon that said, "Still no attacks in France," and it had a caricature of a jihadi saying, "Just wait, we have until the end of January to present our New Year's wishes." And the guy who was killed was the artist Charb. Now, it's clear that the magazine has offended other religions, right? They have attacked Islam relentlessly. They have attacked Christianity relentlessly. However, and some religions are apparently more equal than others, because in 2009, an 80-year-old columnist for the magazine made a joke that President Sarkozy's son was converting to Judaism for financial gain, and he was jailed. Well, he was put on trial on charges of inciting racial hatred. Funny, you could put pictures of Muhammad getting raped by a goat. That's fine, but say that somebody's converting to Judaism for money is a punishable offense. Just the speaking of it, just writing it in a column. And even in France, even the act of denying the Holocaust is a punishable crime. It's a thought crime in France. Now, I'm not endorsing questioning the Holocaust by any means. I believe firmly, we here at the show believe that the Holocaust did happen because there's evidence of it. You can go on about the numbers if you want, but the Holocaust happened. That's not a relevant point, though. It doesn't matter. Did the Holocaust happen or did it? That's getting off the issue. The issue is free speech exists, and the free speech protections exist for unpopular speech. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they're saying. But in France, if you deny the Holocaust, that's a thought crime and you can be punished. Now, it's also funny to point out that not only is questioning the Holocaust a punishable thought crime in France, and it's also illegal to sell Nazi paraphernalia, by the way, on the internet in France. You just put a swastika on something, and I guess you go to jail because it's free speech. Because they stand with free speech over there. But of course, it's not just before any of the Jew-hating audience start saying, yeah, it's all to protect the Jews. That's not really the case, because last year Bob Dylan was formally investigated after making comments that were allegedly inciting racial hatred, and his comments weren't anything of the sort. He was basically talking about how race and racial tension can hold a nation back and linger long after the wrong or the perceived wrong has taken place. And while in France everybody was standing with free speech, so they prosecuted him. Brigitte Bardot, remember, she's not immune to the PC police either. She stated that Muslims were destroying the country by imposing their ways upon the French people, and so she was fined and convicted of inciting racial hatred as well. So it's the PC police, free speech for what we want you to say, but if you say anything else, we don't stand with free speech at all. Remember, we had this French comedian, Dieudonné, in the midst of all this I stand with free speech crap, he made the mistake of believing that there was such a thing. And he, in a Facebook post, he made a statement. He said, "Tonight, as far as I'm concerned, I feel like Charlie Coulibaly." And he was arrested. He was arrested because in France, they stand with free speech. On January 15th, it was reported that the French government had opened nearly 54 criminal cases for people who condoned terrorism. It ordered prosecutors around the country to crack down on hate speech, anti-Semitism, and glorifying terrorism. In other words, free speech. I'm getting too far off topic here, but I want to point something else out. The president of France himself, Francois Hollande, has demonstrated himself as a hypocrite because he went out and gave these speeches. He stood with free speech, and he gave nods to the country's resolve to continue to support war and freedom of expression and all that garbage. Americans are familiar with that because we hear it daily. I guess we believe it, though. And Hollande stated that many of these third world countries just don't understand the concept of free speech and expression because they've never had it. He says, here's a quote, "I'm thinking of countries where sometimes they don't understand what freedom of expression is because they have been deprived of it." All right, but in the same breath, Hollande goes on to say that the individuals who burned French flags as a form of protest should be punished. He says, this is what he says, "They have to be punished because when it happens in France, it's intolerable, but it's also intolerable abroad." So in other words, Hollande says, you people, you don't understand free speech because you're savages, but tear up a piece of cloth and you've got to be punished because free speech. It's funny how things are so different in other countries, but they're so much the same. So, I don't know what to say other than instead of saying "Je suis Charlie," we should be saying "Je suis hypocrite," right? Right, France? All right, so let's get back to the nitty-gritty here. The magazine Charlie Hebdo apparently allowed to attack Islam and Christianity all they want, just not other religions and protected minorities. They have been allowed to continue in the uber PC, political correct police state that France is, and they have done so on a number of occasions. Now, of course, the religious organizations from both camps have responded with the traditional response, the typical response of fundamentalists all over the world, and that is the attempt to stop freedom of speech and expression for those who might not necessarily be convinced by the arguments of the converted, right? So they try to use the government apparatus. They try to use any means at their disposal to shut people up for not agreeing with their own religion. But most people, Christians, Muslims, whatever, they dealt with the desecration of their religion and their faith in Charlie Hebdo. I'm sure they were upset about it, but they dealt with it in much the same way that people over here would deal with it, right? They bitched to their friends, they bitched to their family, then they turned on the soccer game, and then they forgot about it. And, only a small minority of people were moved to protest, and even a smaller minority were moved to become violent, and the ones that became violent were the ones that were either encouraged by foundations and non-governmental organizations or intelligence agencies. These were the individual, or completely run by intelligence agencies as well. But Charlie Hebdo served to act as a catalyst in a number of instances of incitement. Right, we have the Muslim communities in France, as well as the communities across the world, who were inflamed by these pictures, and they were reposting pictures from the Libération magazine. They reposted pictures of the Dutch cartoons. They did that. It served to inflame. So my question would be: is Charlie Hebdo an independent magazine who's lampooning religions, or is Charlie Hebdo a propaganda outfit? It definitely has close ties to Libération. Libération is owned by the Rothschilds, and you can look that up. Now, number 14. France ordered aircraft carriers to the Gulf in order to fight ISIS nearly a full day before the attacks in France. So, if the attacks are going to justify further war and further police state, then that justification has been given retroactively, because we had this report. Agence France Presse on January 6th says that there was the deployment of a Marine battle group announced by Hollande, the armed forces. They announced this on board the Charles de Gaulle on January 14th. They were going to at the time of the report. And essentially the aircraft carrier will be traveling to the Gulf to fight ISIS, right? That's the justification. So with the attacks, you've got the justification. Number 15, timing takes place after French government begins to show signs of opposing Russian sanctions and recognizing a Palestinian state. So timing is everything in these things, in these terrorist attacks, and these false flag attacks. Now, in December of 2014, we've got the lower house of the French parliament voting to recognize a Palestinian state. The vote will not really affect France's foreign policy, but it is a powerful symbol showing the changing of the tide in terms of popular opinion regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We've also got a recent statement by François Hollande that the sanctions on Russia were counterproductive and they needed to end. And this could be seen as a threat to Anglo-American solidarity. So we could say these attacks serve as a justification for French military action in the Middle East, but also as a reminder to some players in the French government not to show dissent in public. We've also got the domestic political agenda to look at. The issue will probably revolve around free speech. The French will probably do just like the Americans. They will walk around with French flags, swagger around, think they're tough, talk about how free they are, how they're an exceptional people, but the reality will be something much more pathetic. The free speech talks will continue. There will probably be some moves to curb free speech even more. But there could be pushback, so the French would like to keep their non-free speech society if they fight hard enough. But also the surveillance state can't get much worse than the West. But there is the surveillance state who will claim that they were overburdened. Remember, the CIA plant Edward Snowden has said that it was the result of an overburdened surveillance system. Overburdened. Well, that's what happens when you listen to the phone calls of every single person in your country. And but the truth is, they're not overburdened. They have the ability to hone in on individuals. It wasn't an overburdening. In other words, that's the problem. The problem is we've had an overburdened surveillance society. The reaction is, oh, do something, fix it, and the solution is, of course, to give more money to the surveillance systems, give more powers to the surveillance systems, and, of course, make it even worse. And Mr. Snowden is playing right along with that because he never stopped working for the NSA, in my opinion. Now, in terms of how this is going to play out, essentially, it's again 9/11. Nobody was fired for incompetence. They were given more money. They were given promotions. This is what you're going to see in France. They're going to claim that we were overworked, we were hampered by constitutional or rights-based constraints, and they're going to need to remove those constraints. They're going to need to have more money, more funding, more ability to surveil everybody in the country, and that's already happening now. So there we are. There is the Charlie Hebdo response here. And let's see how much more time we've got for the show. We've got a few more minutes. I want to get into this Chris Kyle stuff. Now, we've got the release of American Sniper. And militarism in America is at an epic height, right? This is not quite what it was after 9/11, but it's not far off. We're rivaling the celebrations of the Osama bin Laden fake killing, right, with the release of American Sniper. Chris Kyle, the American hero, the new G.I. Joe. Well, it's already being painted. I should confess, I haven't seen the movie. I'm not interested in it. I'm not a fan, really, of Clint Eastwood movies. I'm not going to bust on Clint Eastwood's directing abilities, but I mean, I'm just going to say that I'm not a fan of the movies. So, and I'm not interested in anything that glorifies Chris Kyle. This is furthering culture wars and set up to get people into camps left versus right, and it's set up to boost the support for militarism, right? So they've already drawn the battle lines. If you like Chris Kyle and his movie, then you're in the camp that supports the troops, that loves your country, opposes terrorism, okay? If you don't view Kyle as Christ incarnate, as the new George Washington, then you're clearly in the camp of pinko commies, socialists, terrorist sympathizers, and that sort of thing. And by the way, if you don't like Chris Kyle, if you don't think he was a hero, then you hate the troops. All of them. Every single troop you hate. All right, Chris Kyle was not a hero. Chris Kyle was a murderer. He was a psychopath. He was a war profiteer. He was a liar. All you got to do is look at his book, right? His past history, his own words, to see proof that he is all of those things that I just said, right? We've got Kyle repeatedly. His book is called American Sniper as well, by the way. His book repeatedly referred to the people whose land he invaded and whose families he helped kill as savages, saying that he regretted he was unable to kill more of them. This is what he says in his book. It's a quote, "People ask me all the time, how many people have you killed? My standard response is, does the answer make me less or more of a man?" Well, kind of. "The number is not important to me. I only wish I had killed more. Not for bragging rights, but because I believe the world is a better place without savages out there taking American lives. Everyone I shot in Iraq was trying to harm Americans or Iraqis loyal to the new government. I had a job to do as a SEAL. I killed the enemy, an enemy I saw day in and day out plotting to kill my fellow Americans. I'm haunted by the enemy's successes. They were few, but even a single American life is one too many lost." All right, so he's proud of killing the savages. He didn't regret it. He loved it. This is what he says. "There's another question people ask a lot. Did it bother you killing so many people in Iraq? I tell them no, and I mean it. The first time you shoot someone, you get a little nervous. You think, can I really shoot this guy? Is this really okay? But after you kill your enemy, you see it's okay. You say, great. You do it again and again. You do it so the enemy won't kill you or your countrymen. You do it until there's no one left for you to kill. That's what war is. I loved what I did. I still do. If circumstances were different, if my family didn't need me, I'd be back in a heartbeat. I'm not lying or exaggerating to say it was fun. I had the time of my life being a SEAL." He also seemed to enjoy torturing the Iraqi people. Right? He boasted about the number of kills. He had a great time. He had these remote-controlled Hummers that he writes about, and he would chase them with it. They'd run away screaming, and he had a great time laughing at them. I guess probably because they thought it was a weapon being aimed at them, because they had a bunch of barbarians over there doing that on a daily basis. He also, in this book, I should just point out, he's boasting about his ability to punch cattle because he was raised on a ranch. He punched cattle so hard that he broke his hand twice. And aside from that being incredibly stupid to break your hand twice punching a cow, abusing animals is an indicator of a psychopath in an early time. So, and that's what you got with this animal. It's an insult to animals, I guess. So after he came out from the U.S. military, Kyle moved on to more lucrative pastures in the private sphere of war profiteering. Right? He became the president of Kraft International, which is a military tactical firm working with the U.S. military and with U.S. law enforcement. So in other words, he continued to benefit off the slaughter of innocent people overseas and an increased police state here at home. That wasn't enough, apparently, so he was turned loose as a propagandist. He went out and claimed he had been in a bar fight with Jesse Ventura, so he claimed Ventura was walking around saying he was happy about the death of Navy SEALs. Kyle claimed he just couldn't take it anymore, so he punched Ventura in the face and knocked him down. Now, Ventura was a vocal critic of the war in Iraq, and they basically painted him from that point forward because the lunatics over at Fox News and the people who are so mentally ill as to listen to Fox News and watch Fox News, people like Bill O'Reilly, they immediately painted Jesse Ventura as a heartless person who loved to see dead American soldiers. So they could denigrate Ventura's reputation and the reputation of anybody who oppose the war. So Ventura sued Kyle, but Kyle got killed before the court case got resolved, right? So he continued to sue, which basically it ended up suing the estate of Kyle, which was run by his widow. So they then painted him as a heartless troop hater that sued a poor soldier's widow, right? But it was proven in court that Kyle didn't hit Ventura. I don't think the two even met. I think that was even demonstrated as well. So he is a liar as well. Now, Kyle's representation in the media, as the war hero, as the good old boy soldier who went over there and fought in Iraq, that's not only inaccurate, it's disgraceful. Kyle was a bloodthirsty murderer, and he was proud of his actions. Now, he's become a symbol of people supporting the troops. And then to set the other side of the argument, you've got liberal blowhards like Michael Moore coming out and say that snipers are cowards. Well, you know what? Snipers aren't cowards. Just to be clear. But the fact that Michael Moore, notice Michael Moore didn't talk about the slaughtering of innocent people necessarily. But what he talked about was snipers in general. In other words, he is kind of going after the troops, saying snipers are cowards. But they do this so they get the left wing rallied around fat-ass Michael Moore, while the right wing is, as is always typical, rallying around this disgraced notion of troops and going to war with virtually any and everybody in the world at any opportunity. So you either hate the troops or you love the troops. And pretty much that is the intellectual depth of American conversation surrounding this issue. Now, what I would like to say, this American Sniper movie is now, it's like the Passion of the Christ was for Christians. I mean, we've got people going to the theaters, Americans, as usual, so overcome with the worship of militarism, so devoid of reality. They can't tell fact from fiction anymore because they watch so much damn television. They're standing up and giving ovations whenever the fictional representation of Kyle kills the bad guy in the movie. They're standing up in the theaters and clapping. And they've got the gall to mock the Germans from the 40s. Jesus Christ, this is Germany. All right, so what's funny is this group of people right here that have been the most vocal in the support of war and militarism in general. Nearly half of the American population, nearly half of them, war is the answer. The question is irrelevant. So war is the answer. Whatever question you ask, war is the answer. Patriotism in the United States, patriotism and militarism are synonyms. The fact that most of these people claim to be Christian and their religion tells them that killing is wrong, that doesn't matter because apparently Jesus said killing is wrong unless you're told to do it by politicians and generals. And torture is fine too. In fact, in the eyes of this younger generation, Hollywood generation, the ability to torture somebody is the hallmark of a true man. Right? Any suggestion to the contrary is terrorist sympathies, and you hate the troops. You hate the troops. You hate the troops. Remember that. And of course, unless you yourself have served in the military, and even more so, unless you've participated in combat, you have no right to criticize Chris Kyle. You have no right to criticize the war. You have no right to criticize foreign policy in general. So in America, apparently only military personnel or combat veterans are allowed to have an opinion. An opinion on war and invasion, an opinion on substandard health care, combat pay, GI Bill loans, mental health assistance, homelessness, suicide, economic or health-related issues that actually pose as much of a danger to the lives of veterans as the war they came back from. That they don't want to hear from veterans. That's reserved for academics. That's reserved for politicians. That's reserved for assholes like Bill O'Reilly. But I'm just going to be frankly honest here and say I am sick and tired of hearing how I should not criticize the war or the horrendous acts that are carried out by U.S. military personnel unless I've taken part in perpetrating those acts. You see, I don't have to go to war to know that killing is wrong. I don't have to experience the horrors of war to know that shooting a child or stabbing an old woman is wrong. And for someone to say that I do, that's a moral cop-out on their part, not mine. I'm quite proud of the fact that I never joined the military and I never went to war. So I'll criticize foreign policy, the implementation of that foreign policy, and the results of that foreign policy, as well as the perpetrators of it, anytime I want to. For somebody to suggest otherwise, that's like saying if you don't vote, you can't complain. Yes, I can, and I will. And since we were talking about cliches here, if you don't love it, leave it. I'm sure many of my listeners have heard that before. Well, guess what? I will not leave it if I don't like it. If you can't handle someone of an opinion different from your own without telling them to leave, it's you who need to go somewhere else. But it is an absolute demonstration of hysterical irrationality to suggest that somebody leave their home country, which they have as much right to be in as anybody who ever wore a uniform, to tell them to leave that home simply because another person feels entitled because they've sat around on their fat ass and watched Hollywood propaganda and incendiary political rhetoric like Bill O'Reilly and disagrees with your opinion. It is ridiculous to suggest that criticism of foreign policy equals criticism of the individual soldiers fighting the battles on the ground. That's absolutely ridiculous. You see, wars, the people who are responsible for wars, they don't generally wear uniforms, they wear suits. And if wars were fought by the people who started them, then wars really wouldn't ever be fought. But what I've also got to point out is those people in suits, because they don't fight them. They don't fire bullets. They don't drop bombs. They don't throw grenades. You see, it takes men and women wearing uniforms, not suits, to do that. And those men in uniforms are throwing grenades at people that have much more in common with them than those men in suits. Those men in uniform are shooting people who have done nothing to them or their countrymen. All they've done was had the misfortune of being born in a place where natural resources or geopolitical interests are located as well. So, many soldiers go into this situation with well-meaning ideals. They go in with the best of intentions. They really think that the country was under attack. Or they're just misinformed. Maybe they don't necessarily believe the country's under attack, but maybe they believe the bullshit that comes out of 90% of the Christian churches. Or other Hollywood propaganda. Hollywood propaganda says killing is admirable. Christianity and modern Christianity will tell you Jesus doesn't want you to kill, but except when a general tells you to do it. But you get the tired response, like, these men and women are fighting for you. Bullshit. I'll give you a quote from Smedley Darlington Butler. This guy was a veteran. This guy served in combat. This is what he says. I served in all commissioned ranks from a second lieutenant to a major general. And during that time, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer for capitalism. End quote. So he was one of the most decorated soldiers in the U.S. military at the time, and he figured the game out. Now, it was too late to change anything that he'd done, but he figured it out. And there's a lot of other soldiers who are from all ranks and all branches of the military who have found out that what they thought they were fighting for was a lie, that it was a business decision coming down from the top, and it was not a decision to protect the United States. Now, a lot of these soldiers have started speaking out about the consequences and this stupidity, this repetitive stupidity of the American population They're talking about the results of the American stupidity and the decisions made from the top on the victim population as well as the soldiers. And these guys are heroes, not Chris Kyle. In fact, these guys are heroes twice over because they put their lives on the line for something they believed in once. And twice they realized it was wrong. They had the courage to speak out to try to stop it from ever happening again. But the second time around, though, they don't have a band of brothers who's going to defend them no matter what they do or say. What they're going to do is find derision amongst many of their former veterans who can't admit that they were duped. Because if they admit that they were duped, they admit that they would have done some very horrible things that they are responsible for. Because as much as I hate Donald Rumsfeld, as much as we hate George Bush, as much as we'd like to see them in prison for the rest of their natural lives, they didn't pull the trigger. You did. Now, for the record, I certainly don't condone harassing veterans when they come back and treating them like garbage because of what they did. They shouldn't be subjected to that. Now, the ones that go out and try to swagger around and fling their service in your face and do what Chris Kyle did, which is brag about it, they deserve a response. But the others just have to deal with what they have to deal with on their own. Now, just wanted to point out something else here, that there's a lot of other soldiers who came to the same conclusions that these winter soldiers who have spoken out against the war have come to, but instead of speaking out, some of them haven't come to those conclusions, by the way. Some of them maybe are torn by the cognitive dissonance of what they did, what they wanted to do, what they were told is right and wrong, and how it didn't necessarily jive when they actually went to war. These individuals, they didn't become public personalities. They became drug addicts and alcoholics and depressives, or they killed themselves. They can trot them out once a year and call them heroes and thank them for their service, but then for the other 364 days a year, they're gone. They're hidden, and that's where the ruling class wants them. In fact, that's where the war supporters want them as well, hidden, because they show the underside of war. They don't have college degrees and big trucks and middle-class houses and good jobs. They've got homeless shelters and crack houses and filthy hospitals. They've got traumatic brain injuries. They don't have legs. They don't look like John Wayne anymore. You see, young people aren't inspired to rush to war by crippled old men. They're inspired by flashy movies and braggarts. So in the minds of not only the elite, of course the elite, Henry Kissinger called American servicemen and women dumb, stupid animals to be used for foreign policy. But in the minds of people here on the bottom, the commentators and the war supporters, some veterans are certainly more equal than others. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to go for the night. I think I've actually gone over the show time, so hopefully this airs, but you can catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
The Anti-Media Radio with your host Nick Burnby here on UCY.tv.
Truth on the Tracks you can catch every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.tv.
For more news, visit